The emergency room at St. Mark's Hospital operated like a well-tuned orchestra, a chaotic symphony where each movement was precise. Each player essential. Dr. Marcus Bennett, the attending trauma surgeon, stepped into the whirlwind, his steady presence grounding the team around him. "Dr. Bennett," a voice called. Marcus turned to see Nurse Rachel Myers, her face pinched with urgency. "We've got a critical incoming," she said, handing him a tablet displaying the patient's vitals. "Bethany Greene, 56. Collapse at home. Paramedics suspect cardiac arrest, but her BP's tanking, and there's possible internal bleeding." Marcus scanned the report, his mind already racing through possibilities. "How far out?" "5 minutes. We've prepped OR3. "Good. Alert Dr. Kaminsky from cardiology. But keep her on standby for now. I'll need anesthesia ready as soon as she arrives. Let's move." Rachel nodded and disappeared into the controlled chaos of the ER. Marcus walked briskly toward the operating rooms, his coat swishing behind him. He paused outside the scrub room, taking a deep breath. Moments like these were where he thrived, the adrenaline, the stakes, the chance to save a life. It was what had driven him to medicine, even when the path wasn't easy. The stretcher burst through the double doors, paramedics shouting updates. Bethany Greene lay unconscious, her pale face framed by limp blonde hair. Marcus caught a glimpse of her vitals on the monitor and frowned. Her heart rate was erratic, blood pressure dangerously low. "Let's move her to OR3. Marcus barked, his voice cutting through the noise. "Get a central line in, now." The team sprang into action, transferring Bethany with practiced precision. Marcus followed, already snapping on gloves. "Vitals?" "BP's dropping, 70/40. Rachel called out, her hands steady as she inserted the IV. "Push fluids. Intubate and monitor her O2 levels." Marcus glanced at the ultrasound as another nurse brought it to his side. "Possible ruptured artery," he muttered. "Prep for immediate exploratory surgery." As the anesthesia took hold and Bethany's breathing was stabilized, Marcus scrubbed in. The OR lights were harsh, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. The team around him waited, their trust in his leadership evident. "We're losing her," one nurse called. "Start compressions," Marcus ordered, his voice calm despite the urgency. "We're not letting her go." The hours stretched as Marcus worked tirelessly. His hands moved with practiced precision, isolating the source of the bleed and stabilizing the damage. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he didn't falter. Finally, the bleeding was controlled, and the monitors stabilized. Marcus stepped back, peeling off his gloves. He glanced at the clock. 4 hours. Bethany Greene was alive, and the surgery was a success. The recovery room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. Bethany Greene stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Pain flared in her abdomen, and she groaned softly. A figure approached, tall, dark-skinned, and dressed in surgical scrubs. Marcus Bennett. He stood at the foot of her bed, his posture professional, his expression neutral. "Good morning, Ms. Greene," he said, his tone calm. "I'm Dr. Marcus Bennett. I performed your surgery last night." Bethany's bleary gaze focused on him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You?" she rasped, her voice sharp despite the fatigue. Marcus nodded. "Yes, your condition was critical, but the surgery was successful. You're stable now and on the path to recovery." Her expression hardened. "Where's the real doctor?" Marcus's calm exterior didn't waver. "I am your doctor, Ms. Greene. I led the surgical team and ensured everything went according to plan." Bethany huffed, her pale cheeks flushing with irritation. "You expect me to believe that? I feel like I've been hit by a truck. What did you do to me?" Marcus glanced at her chart, confirming her vitals were stable. "The discomfort you're feeling is normal after a procedure like this. Your recovery will take time, but everything is progressing as it should." Bethany's sneer deepened. "Normal? I've had surgeries before, and I've never felt this awful. What did you mess up?" Marcus held her gaze, his voice steady. "If you have concerns, I can arrange for another doctor to review your case. But I assure you, your care was handled professionally and with precision. Don't bother." Bethany snapped. "I'll talk to the hospital director. I want someone else, someone who knows what they're doing." Marcus nodded once. "I'll pass on your request. Rest is crucial for your recovery. Let the nurses know if you're in pain." As he left the room, Bethany's muttered complaints followed him. Marcus didn't stop. His steps measured despite the heaviness in his chest. In the days that followed, Bethany Greene's hostility became the talk of the hospital. Her complaints escalated, and she demanded meetings with higher-ups, claiming Marcus had botched her surgery. "She's threatening a lawsuit," Karen Holloway said one afternoon, her expression tense. Marcus sat across from her, his face calm but his hands clasped tightly. "Her recovery is on track. I've double-checked every detail of her case." "I know," Karen replied, "but this isn't about facts. Marcus, it's about perception, and she's making this personal." Marcus nodded, the familiar weight pressing down on him. "I'll keep doing my rounds. Let me know if anything changes." "You've got our support," Karen said firmly. "Don't forget that." But as Marcus walked through the hospital, the whispers and sidelong glances reminded him that support wasn't always enough. Late one night, Marcus sat in the staff room, staring at his untouched cup of coffee. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The kind of weariness that came from fighting battles that went beyond the operating room. Rachel Myers entered, her face softening when she saw him. "Rough day?" Marcus chuckled dryly. "Something like that." "She's still at it, isn't she?" Rachel asked, sitting across from him. "She is," Marcus admitted, "and it's not just about the surgery. We both know that." Rachel nodded, her expression pained. "It's not fair. You saved her life." "I know," Marcus said quietly, "but fairness doesn't change the way some people see me." For a moment, the two sat in silence, the hum of the hospital filling the room. "You're one of the best we have, Marcus," Rachel said softly. "Don't let her make you forget that." "I won't," Marcus replied, though the words felt heavier than he wanted them to. Bethany Greene's name had become synonymous with dread among the nurses. Even those who hadn't worked directly with her knew the stories, sharp comments, veiled threats, and an unrelenting focus on her disdain for Dr. Marcus Bennett. Nurse Rachel Myers overheard a conversation at the nurses' station. "Can you believe she's threatening a lawsuit?" one nurse whispered. "Dr. Bennett saved her life. She's just bitter," another replied, glancing nervously down the hall toward Bethany's room. "And you know why?" Rachel cleared her throat, silencing the discussion. "Focus on your rounds," she said firmly. "Dr. Bennett doesn't need this getting back to him." But Marcus already knew. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted, and he could feel it in every glance, every whispered conversation. As he walked through the halls, the weight of Bethany's accusations hung over him like a storm cloud. It was late when Marcus finally made it home. His wife, Danielle, was waiting for him in the kitchen, her expression soft with concern. "You're late," she said, setting a plate of reheated lasagna on the table. Marcus sat down, running a hand through his short, tightly coiled hair. "Long day." Danielle sat across from him, resting her chin on her hand. "Want to talk about it?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "It's Bethany Greene. She's escalating. Complaints, accusations, now a threat of legal action." Danielle's brow furrowed. "She's blaming you for what? Saving her life?" Marcus chuckled dryly. "Apparently. That's not enough. She's convinced I messed up somehow. Or maybe she just can't accept that someone like me was responsible for her survival." Danielle reached across the table, her hand covering his. "You've faced this kind of thing before, Marcus, and every time, you've risen above it." "I know," Marcus said, his voice quieter now, "but it doesn't make it easier. I walk into that hospital every day knowing I have to prove myself, not just as a surgeon, but as a black surgeon. And even when I do everything right, it's still not enough for people like her." Danielle's grip tightened. "You're one of the best, Marcus. She can't take that away from you." Marcus nodded, but the heaviness in his chest remained. 2 days later, Marcus was called into Dr. Karen Holloway's office. Her face was calm, but Marcus could see the tension in her tightly folded hands. "She's filed a formal complaint," Karen said without preamble. Marcus sat down slowly. "On what grounds?" "Negligence, primarily," Karen replied, "but she's also claiming racial discrimination. She's alleging that you provided substandard care because she's white." Marcus's stomach tightened, but his face remained impassive. "She's reaching." Karen nodded. "Of course, she is. The evidence doesn't support her claims. And we have your record to back that up. But this could still get messy." Marcus exhaled slowly. "What's the plan?" "Our legal team is already involved," Karen said. "They'll be gathering evidence, your notes, the surgical records, testimonies from the staff. We'll fight this, Marcus, you've done nothing wrong. Thank you, Marcus said. He stood, his posture straight despite the weight pressing on him. Let me know if you need anything from me. As he left the office, Marcus felt the familiar mix of frustration and resignation. He had always known his career would come with challenges like this. But knowing didn't make it any less exhausting. The following week was a blur of consultations, surgeries, and whispered conversations. Marcus kept his head down, focusing on his work, but the tension in the hospital was palpable. Late one night, Marcus found himself alone in the staff room, staring at the city lights through the window. The hum of the hospital was faint but constant, a reminder that the work never truly stopped. Rachel Myers walked in, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. She hesitated when she saw Marcus, then approached slowly. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Marcus shook his head. Just needed a minute. Rachel sat down across from him, her expression unreadable. You know, we've all been talking. Marcus raised an eyebrow. About Bethany Greene? Rachel nodded. About how unfair this whole thing is. You've done everything right, Marcus. Everyone knows that. Not everyone, Marcus said, his tone wry. Rachel hesitated. I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've seen doctors who genuinely don't care, who cut corners and blame everyone else when something goes wrong. You're not one of them. Marcus looked at her, gratitude softening his features. Thanks, Rachel. She shrugged. Just don't forget it. Bethany's accusations took on a life of their own. Her complaint reached the hospital board, and though no formal investigation was launched, the murmurs of discontent among the staff grew louder. Marcus remained steadfast, his professionalism unshaken in public. But at night, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. One morning, as he prepared for his rounds, Danielle stopped him at the door. You're stronger than this, Marcus, she said, her voice steady. Don't let her win. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. I won't. And he meant it. The complaint Bethany Greene filed began circulating among hospital staff, turning whispers into a low hum of unease. Marcus moved through the hospital halls with his usual calm demeanor. But he could feel the eyes following him, some supportive, others skeptical. Dr. Bennett, Rachel said one afternoon, intercepting him near the elevators. Her tone was cautious. There's talk. There's always talk. Marcus replied evenly, though he didn't slow his stride. Not like this. Rachel hesitated, glancing around before lowering her voice. Some of the staff are wondering if there's more to her claims. Marcus stopped, his jaw tightening. Are you? Rachel shook her head vehemently. No, I know you, Marcus. I just thought you should know what's being said. Thanks, he said quietly before stepping into the elevator. As the doors closed, Marcus leaned against the wall, exhaling deeply. He knew this wasn't just about Bethany. Her accusations gave voice to doubts some people already harbored, doubts that had nothing to do with his skill and everything to do with his skin color. Later that day, Marcus was called into Dr. Karen Holloway's office. The tension in the air was palpable as she gestured for him to sit. She's filed an additional complaint, Karen began, folding her hands on the desk. This time with the state medical board. Marcus blinked, surprised despite himself. On what grounds? Karen sighed. The same, negligence and discrimination. It's clear she's grasping at straws. But the board is obligated to review every claim. Marcus rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation pressing harder. This isn't just about me. She's trying to make this about race. Karen nodded. We're prepared to defend you. The hospital's legal team is compiling everything, patient records, staff statements, your track record. But Marcus, she hesitated, her usually firm expression softening. What? He asked, bracing himself. You need to be ready for the possibility that this won't end quickly. She said, even baseless claims can take months to resolve. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his thoughts churning. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Karen said firmly, you keep doing what you do best. Let us handle the rest. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his office, staring at the complaint Karen had handed him. The words blurred together, but the intent was clear. Bethany Greene wasn't just angry, she was determined to destroy his career. The door creaked open, and Danielle stepped in, holding a takeout bag. I figured you hadn't eaten, she said, setting the bag on his desk. Marcus managed a small smile. You figured right. Danielle sat on the edge of the desk, watching him carefully. Talk to me. She's taking it to the state board, Marcus said. his voice flat. Danielle's eyes widened. She's really trying to ruin you. She is, Marcus said, his tone heavy. And she might succeed, even if the claims don't hold up. The damage to my reputation? He trailed off, shaking his head. Danielle reached for his hand, her grip firm. Listen to me. You've worked too hard and come too far to let someone like her tear you down. You're not alone in this. Marcus, you have me, the hospital, your colleagues. We're not letting her win. Marcus looked at her, the tightness in his chest easing slightly. Thanks, Donnie. I needed that. You'll always have me, she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. Over the next few days, Marcus continued his rounds, focusing on his patients despite the storm brewing around him. One afternoon, he stopped by the nurse's station to review a patient's chart. Nurse Rachel Myers approached him with a hesitant smile. Dr. Bennett, she said softly, I thought you'd want to know, some of the staff have started writing letters of support. For the board. Marcus raised an eyebrow. They didn't have to do that. They wanted to, Rachel replied. We all know the truth, Marcus, and we want to make sure they do, too. For the first time in days, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Thank you, Rachel. That means more than I can say. Despite the support Marcus was receiving, Bethany Greene's accusations grew louder. She began making daily demands to speak with the hospital director, each encounter laced with vitriol. I won't stop until he's gone, she declared one morning, her voice echoing down the hall as security escorted her back to her room. You hear me? I'll ruin him. Marcus overheard the commotion as he approached the nurse's station. He paused, his hands tightening around the patient chart he was holding. Rachel glanced at him, her expression apologetic. She's been like this all morning. It's fine, Marcus said evenly, but as he walked away, the weight of Bethany's threats clung to him like a shadow. That night, Marcus sat in the darkened living room of his home, the only light coming from the muted glow of the television. Danielle found him there, his hands clasped tightly as he stared at the screen without seeing it. She's not going to win, Danielle said, sitting beside him. Marcus didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Even if she doesn't, it feels like she already has. Danielle shook her head. No, she hasn't, and she won't. Marcus looked at her, his eyes tired but determined. I just want to get back to my work, to helping people. That's all I've ever wanted. And you will, Danielle said firmly. You just have to keep going. The hospital's legal team began working in earnest to counter Bethany Greene's escalating complaints. Marcus was called into a meeting with Anthony Carter, the hospital's lead counsel, and Dr. Karen Holloway. Dr. Bennett, this won't be an easy fight. Anthony began, his expression calm but serious. Ms. Greene's accusations are baseless. But the way she's framing them could attract attention. We need to be thorough. Marcus nodded, his face impassive. What do you need from me? We'll need detailed records of everything from the surgery, Anthony said, adjusting his glasses. Notes, post-op reports, and testimonies from the staff who were in the OR with you. Karen added, we're also compiling letters of support from your colleagues. Rachel Myers and a few others have already volunteered. That's good to hear, Marcus said quietly. I'll do whatever I can to help. Anthony leaned forward, his tone softening. Dr. Bennett, I know this is personal for her. And I know it feels personal for you, too. But we'll fight this. You've done everything by the book. Marcus nodded again, but the tightness in his chest remained. He trusted the legal team, but he also knew how accusations like these could spiral out of control. As the hospital rallied around Marcus, Bethany Greene found her own supporters. Her lawyer, Evan Brooks, was a young and ambitious man who saw the case as an opportunity to make a name for himself. During a meeting in her private room, Evan laid out their strategy. Ms. Greene, your story is compelling, Evan said, his voice smooth and confident. The idea that a prominent surgeon might have provided substandard care because of personal bias. It's something people will pay attention to. Bethany crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. It's not an idea, it's the truth. That man didn't care if I lived or died. Evan nodded, hiding his skepticism. He didn't believe her entirely. But he didn't need to. All he needed was the case. We'll push the narrative, focus on the emotional toll, the lingering pain you're experiencing. The court will respond to that. Bethany smirked, her confidence bolstered. Good, I want him gone. As Bethany's case gained traction, the mood in the hospital grew tense. The nurses who had written letters of support for Marcus found themselves in awkward positions when questioned by other staff members. "You really think he didn't do anything wrong?" one nurse asked Rachel Myers during a quiet moment at the station. "I know he didn't," Rachel replied firmly. "Still," the other nurse said, lowering her voice, "if the accusations stick, it'll reflect on all of us. Maybe it's better to stay out of it." Rachel's eyes flashed. "Better to stay out of it? He's our colleague, and he's innocent. That should matter." The nurse looked away, and Rachel sighed, frustration bubbling under her calm exterior. She knew where the doubt came from, but it didn't make it any less infuriating. Marcus continued his rounds with unwavering professionalism, refusing to let Bethany's accusations distract him from his patients. One morning, he visited an elderly man recovering from heart surgery. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Harris?" Marcus asked, checking the chart at the foot of the bed. The man smiled weakly. "Better, thanks to you, Doc. My daughter says you're a miracle worker." Marcus chuckled softly. "No miracles here, just science and a great team." As he adjusted the man's medication, Mr. Harris added, "I heard about that woman giving you trouble. Don't let her get to you. Son, people like that, they're loud, but they don't last." "Thanks, Mr. Harris," Marcus said, his tone warm. But as he left the room, the man's words lingered, loud but temporary. Marcus thought. He hoped that was true. At home, Marcus leaned heavily on Danielle's unwavering support. She had become his sounding board, his confidant, and his reminder of why he fought so hard to be the doctor he was. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Danielle spoke up. "You know, this could be an opportunity." "An opportunity?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "To show people what you're made of," Danielle said. "Bethany Greene wants to tear you down. But when this is over, you'll come out stronger, and she won't be able to touch you." Marcus considered her words, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You always know how to keep me grounded." "That's my job," she said, leaning into him. The hospital's legal team filed their response to Bethany Greene's complaint, dismantling her claims with meticulous evidence. Testimonies from Marcus's colleagues painted a clear picture of his professionalism, while detailed records from the surgery proved that every step of her care had been by the book. Karen Holloway updated Marcus during a late meeting. "Anthony says we're in a strong position," she said. "Her lawyer doesn't have much to work with." Marcus nodded. "Good, I'm ready for this to be over." "It will be," Karen assured him. "But for now, focus on your work. We'll take care of the rest." As the hospital's defense gained momentum, Bethany grew increasingly frustrated. During a heated meeting with Evan Brooks, she slammed her fist on the table. "They're lying," she shouted. "I know what he did to me. Why can't you prove it?" Evan sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Ms. Greene, the evidence is stacked against us. If you're willing to settle." "Settle?" Bethany's voice rose. "I don't want money. I want him gone." Evan leaned back, his patience thinning. "If we push forward, you need to be prepared for the possibility of losing. And if that happens, it could backfire." Bethany's jaw tightened, her eyes blazing with determination. "Then we push harder." Marcus found a rare moment of peace one evening in the hospital chapel. The quiet space, bathed in soft light, offered him a chance to reflect. As he sat in the pew, a thought struck him. No matter what Bethany Greene said or did, he knew who he was. He had dedicated his life to helping others. And nothing, no accusation, no lawsuit, could take that away. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt the tension in his chest ease. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, cloaking St. Mark's Hospital in an unspoken tension. Marcus Bennett walked into the courtroom with Dr. Karen Holloway at his side. His suit tailored and his demeanor calm. But inside, a storm brewed. "Just remember," Karen said, leaning in, "the truth is on your side." Marcus nodded. "I know, I just hope everyone else sees it." Bethany Greene was already seated at the plaintiff's table. Her lawyer, Evan Brooks, shuffling through papers with feigned confidence. She shot Marcus a glare as he walked past, her face a mask of righteous indignation. The courtroom was modest, its wood-paneled walls lending a solemn air to the proceedings. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, entered briskly, her gaze sharp as she surveyed the room. "Let's begin," she said, her tone leaving no room for nonsense. Evan Brooks opened the proceedings with a dramatic flourish. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Bethany Greene, has suffered greatly due to the negligence and discrimination of Dr. Marcus Bennett. The evidence will show that her care was substandard, and the emotional toll she has endured is immeasurable." Bethany nodded vigorously, as if each word were a hammer driving home her truth. The hospital's attorney, Anthony Carter, rose calmly. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Dr. Bennett's care was exemplary, his conduct professional, and the accusations baseless. Ms. Greene's claims lack factual support and rely entirely on personal bias." The judge glanced between them. "Proceed with your evidence." The first witnesses called were members of the surgical team who had assisted Marcus during Bethany's operation. Rachel Myers took the stand first, her posture confident. "Ms. Myers," Evan began, his voice smooth, "can you confirm that Dr. Bennett performed the surgery on Ms. Greene?" "Yes," Rachel replied firmly. "I was there the entire time." "And would you say he handled the surgery flawlessly?" Rachel hesitated, then said, "Every surgery has its challenges. But Dr. Bennett's work was precise and professional. Ms. Greene's life was saved because of his expertise." Evan pressed further, but Rachel's testimony held steady. Anthony Carter followed up, emphasizing the success of the surgery and Rachel's unwavering confidence in Marcus's abilities. When it was Bethany's turn to testify, the room grew tense. She adjusted her posture, her face a carefully arranged portrait of indignation and suffering. "Ms. Greene," Evan said, stepping forward, "can you describe your experience with Dr. Bennett?" Bethany's voice quivered as she began. "I woke up in agony. Worse than I've ever felt. And when I saw him, the man who operated on me, I knew something wasn't right. He didn't care about me. He botched the surgery. And now I'm left to deal with the consequences." Marcus kept his expression neutral, but her words landed like blows. When Anthony cross-examined her, his questions were sharp. "Ms. Greene, are you aware that your recovery proceeded within expected parameters for your procedure?" Bethany frowned. "That's what they want you to believe." "And yet," Anthony pressed, "there is no evidence of complications. And multiple staff members have testified to Dr. Bennett's professionalism. Do you have any evidence to support your claims of negligence?" Bethany faltered, her confidence wavering. "I know how I feel," she said stubbornly. Marcus took the stand the next day, his hands steady as he adjusted the microphone. Anthony Carter began the questioning. "Dr. Bennett, can you describe the procedure you performed on Ms. Greene?" Marcus explained each step with precision, his voice calm and measured. He detailed the challenges of the surgery and how he had addressed them, emphasizing the positive outcome. "And did you at any point deviate from standard medical practices?" Anthony asked. "No," Marcus replied firmly. Evan Brooks seized his opportunity. "Dr. Bennett, are you suggesting that Ms. Greene's pain and suffering are imaginary?" "I'm suggesting that her recovery aligns with medical expectations," Marcus said evenly. "Pain after surgery is normal, and we managed it appropriately." Evan leaned closer. "Do you believe Ms. Greene's accusations are rooted in bias?" Marcus paused. "I believe her accusations are unfounded and not based on facts." Weeks passed as the courtroom drama unfolded. Medical experts testified, hospital records were scrutinized, and Marcus's reputation was laid bare for all to see. Finally, the judge delivered her decision. The court finds that the claims of negligence and discrimination lack evidence. She declared, her voice firm, "The case is dismissed." Relief washed over Marcus, but it was tinged with exhaustion. The battle had been won, but the scars it left behind felt deep and unyielding. Back at the hospital, Marcus was greeted with quiet congratulations from his colleagues. Rachel Myers hugged him briefly, whispering, "I told you we had your back." Later, in Karen Holloway's office, Marcus reflected on the ordeal. "You've proven yourself, Marcus," Karen said, "not just as a doctor, but as a person of integrity." "Thanks," Marcus said softly. "I just hope it's enough to stop this from happening again." Karen's expression grew somber. "It might not be, but you've shown us all what it means to stand tall." That night, Marcus sat with Danielle on their balcony, watching the city lights. The lawsuit was behind him, but its echoes lingered. "You did it," Danielle said, her voice warm. Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "We did it," she smiled, leaning against him. "So, what's next?" Marcus thought for a moment. "The same as always. I'll keep doing the work. I'll keep proving myself, not because of people like her, but because of the patients who need me." And as the stars began to dot the night sky, Marcus felt a quiet resolve settle over him. The fight wasn't over, but for now, he could breathe. In the days following the dismissal of Bethany Greene's case, the hospital began to feel like itself again. The whispers quieted, and the tension that had gripped the halls started to lift. Marcus Bennett returned to his routine, focusing on his patients and his team. But beneath the surface, the scars of the ordeal lingered. During a staff meeting, Karen Holloway addressed the elephant in the room. "We've been through a difficult time," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But let me be clear, St. Mark's stands by its team. And we're proud of the care we provide. Let's move forward together." The words were met with nods of agreement, but Marcus could feel the underlying unease. Bethany's accusations, though dismissed, had left an impression. One afternoon, Marcus was checking on a post-op patient when he heard a knock at the door. "Dr. Bennett?" a voice called. Marcus turned to see Mr. Harris, the elderly heart patient he had treated weeks earlier, standing in the doorway with a small box in his hands. "Mr. Harris," Marcus said, smiling. "Good to see you. How are you feeling?" "Better every day, thanks to you," Mr. Harris said, stepping inside. "I just wanted to say thank you. You've been through a lot lately. And I thought you could use a reminder of what your work means to people like me." He handed Marcus the box, which contained a small framed photo of a sunrise. "Sunrises remind me that every day is a new chance," Mr. Harris said, "just like you gave me a new chance." Marcus felt a lump in his throat as he accepted the gift. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. This means a lot." That evening, Marcus sat in his office, the photo of the sunrise propped on his desk. The quiet hum of the hospital filled the room, grounding him as he reflected on the events of the past few months. Danielle's words came back to him, "You'll come out stronger." She had been right, though the ordeal had been grueling. It had also solidified his resolve. He thought of the patients he had helped, the colleagues who had supported him, and the truth that had ultimately prevailed. The following week, Marcus met with Karen Holloway and the hospital's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. "We've been discussing ways to address implicit bias," Karen said. "After what you went through, it's clear we need to do more." Marcus nodded. "It's not just about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The committee proposed new training programs for staff, workshops on cultural competency, and opportunities for open dialogue. Marcus agreed to help lead the initiatives, channeling his experience into creating change. Though Bethany Greene had disappeared from the hospital's radar, her actions had left a mark. Marcus found himself replaying her words in quiet moments, not with anger, but with a sense of determination. He knew there would be others like her, patients who couldn't see beyond his skin color, colleagues who doubted him, and systems that needed reform. But he also knew he wasn't alone in the fight. One evening, Marcus and Danielle walked through the park near their home. The air was crisp, and the fading sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you regret it?" Danielle asked, breaking the silence. "Regret what?" Marcus replied. "Staying at St. Mark's, fighting through all of this." Marcus shook his head. "No, it was hard, but it reminded me why I'm here. I became a doctor to help people. And that hasn't changed." Danielle smiled. "You're incredible. You know that?" Marcus chuckled. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." As the weeks turned into months, Marcus threw himself into his work with renewed energy. The hospital's diversity initiatives gained momentum, and Marcus became a trusted voice in shaping the conversation. One afternoon, Karen Holloway called him into her office. "Marcus," she began, "we're looking at candidates for a new leadership position, Director of Surgical Education. Your name keeps coming up." Marcus blinked, surprised. "You think I'm ready for that?" Karen smiled. "I think you've been ready for a long time. What you've been through has only made you stronger. Think about it." Months later, Marcus stood at the front of a lecture hall, addressing a group of surgical residents. Behind him, a slide read, "Beyond the Scalpel, Empathy and Excellence in Medicine." He spoke about the technical aspects of surgery, but also about the humanity required to be a great doctor. He shared lessons from his own experiences, both painful and triumphant, hoping to inspire the next generation to rise above prejudice and fear. As the lecture ended, the residents applauded. Marcus felt a quiet sense of pride. Outside the hall, Danielle waited for him, her smile bright. "How did it go?" she asked. Marcus grinned. "It went well. I think they'll be ready for whatever comes next. Danielle nodded. Just like you. The photo of the sunrise sat on Marcus's desk as a constant reminder of new beginnings. Each morning, as he walked into the hospital, he carried the lessons of his journey with him. He knew the road ahead would have challenges, but he also knew he had the strength to face them. And as the first light of dawn broke over the city, Marcus Bennett stood tall, ready to keep healing, teaching, and inspiring.